individuals, we feel like we can talk to ourselves in ways that makes us feel worthy. We can learn to talk to each other in ways that makes each other feel worthy, and then create organizations where we can all do our best work because we're not worried about whether or not we are kind of respected and seen as worthy when we show up at work.
Welcome everyone to another episode of WorkPod. Today we have with us Amelia Dunlop. She's a Chief Experience Officer from Deloitte. And Amelia, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So one thing I love guest about to come on a show who talks about basically humanity or human aspects, I think, and someone from the digital side talking about humanizing, that's all the more fascinating. So thank you for leading that charge. To kick it off, love to know your background, love to know your journey thus far. What brought you to this world of experience officer?
Super. Well, why don't I tell you a little bit about my current role? So I'm the Chief Experience Officer for Deloitte Digital. And basically that means I get to kind of wake up every day and bring our aspiration to elevate the human experience to life. And we set that aspiration a couple of years ago because we realized that it wasn't just about the customer experience, or wasn't about the employee experience or the partner experience. It was about what does it mean to be more human, right? So you and I woke up this morning as humans, not as customers, not as employees. And sometimes with all of our work, we forget that. And so my own journey has been one of management consulting from the field of strategy, from the field of human-centered design and innovation, but now all really focused on what does it mean to make our work and make our lives more human.
Interesting. And how has the journey been for you when it comes to walk us through your career, right? So starting off, how has been this journey, and then how is the experience market has evolved over the years?
Certainly. So I guess my career, I began in the kind of the field of management consulting a little over 20 years ago at this point. And I started on the strategy side, really focused on helping clients solve their kind of the big gnarly strategic issues. I got a bug for innovation because there is something really fun about those challenges about growth. And then from there is where I moved more into this field of experience, because as you know, so much of innovation is starting with human-centered design. And what does it mean to kind of create innovations that create just better experiences for that end user?
And how has the field of human experience has evolved over last couple of maybe a decade or so? Like, walk us through how is the industry shaping up to serve more human, and rather than expecting humans to serve the technology.
Sure. So one of the things that I think is central to the field of human experience is the growth of the exponential growth of technology, right? And that is up, to your point, in the last couple of decades, we've seen just so much advancement in technology, data analytics, and artificial intelligence. And I think we've all benefited from that, right? The fact that you and I could do this right now over video is one of the ways in which we're all benefiting from that technology. But I think one of the offshoots is this explosion technologically has created what I call human experience debt, which is very similar to technical debt, which is just accumulated over time, or financial debt, which is accumulated over time. Human experience debt is the way in which our technology can make us feel less human and more disconnected from the things that matter most to us and give us meaning in our lives.
I think that's beautifully put. So we were having a brief conversation before we started that I'm from a data science world. I'm from the world where we say, okay, listen to data, right? Data never lies. Data has everything, and over the time we have seen the problem with that analysis, right? It obviously data does tell the truth, but as long as the data sources are adequately picked and all that. And when you talk about the human experience, right? When you talk about how technology or human experience that technology is serving, I th- Deloitte is a major support when it comes to educating the market, when it comes to how the digital is impacting the world, or how we should be shaping. So when you look at your that role, when you look at your role as a digital officer for an organization, chief experience officer of an organization, what are you seeing that what are some of the things that you see in the industry that people are doing it wrong, or we should do it differently, or what are some of your observations?
Yeah, my observation is that it shouldn't be data for its own sake, right? And I think you mentioned this. We always need to make sure that we're aware of the humans selecting the data and the biases and everything that they bring to the table, because we know that there's the whole question of ethical tech and ethical data. And then, importantly, on the other side, for whom the data is serving, right? And to make sure that we understand that there are humans on the other side of that data, and that we never lose sight of them. So for me, it's not a question of is it a data-led approach or an insight-led approach, or is it a human approach? I really think the answer is both. And how do we use a focus on the human experience and insights to kind of let us be more human at scale?
And if you look at the current scenario, we've just been through a massive pandemic, lockdowns, things are coming up, and I think over last uh, 1.5 year has been tormenting when it comes to the human aspect, or the work aspect, or the personal aspect. And technology has taken the grounds, right? Because we are more relying on technology. We are now learning we are again getting back to the tangling of we are now more empathetic towards technology, right? Because we were more adoptive, more sort of. So from your vantage point, how has the experience landscape evolved from your perspective over this pandemic span?
So as I think about that, and again, the fact that we're doing this, that we're still very much in the middle of the pandemic, and that technology has made it possible to connect in ways that we never thought possible before, and Zoom birthday parties and Zoom weddings, and as well as Zoom doctor visits that we might not have otherwise had even a year and a half ago. So technology has absolutely made our lives better off, and and we are still experiencing that human experience debt. We are still living through that sense, that time of burnout, or that feeling of lack of connection, because we all know we don't get quite the same energy, quite the same feeling as you and I having a conversation in the room, or with your listeners together with us in the room, as we would through the use of technology. So I do think technology is absolutely something that we've benefited from, but we need to more consciously invest in the connections that make us feel more human.
And if you uh, take yourself to, say, maybe last year March, right? Things are evolving again, things are rapidly changing, and you are leading experience for an organization, you're leading sort of all these aspects. Tell me, how do you grapple this as a chief experience officer? Whatever is happening, your organization is very high touch point. There are people involved, there are customers involved, there are handshakes involved. How do you see that, or how do you ensure that the lights are on, and walk us through how has that changed, that hiccup?
I mean, so how much time do you have? I feel like so much has changed in the last 18 months. But I think some of the highlights that I would point to, and every organization had to grapple with, what does it mean to continue to serve your customers in a way where you can't necessarily shake their hand,
Mhm.
and still create a connection or create loyalty. They've also had to figure out how do we retain our workforce, particularly now in sort of the Great Resignation, where people are exercising their options, and to kind of to move around. So I think every organization that is surviving and thriving now is grappling with that two-part workforce experience, future of work, as well as customer experience and future of customer. My perspective is they're inextricably linked, and that focusing on the human experience, whether as an employee or as a customer, are really what matters.
Interesting. And when you look at the clients that you are serving or that you are helping out, how has tell us some of the successful strategies that you have seen, that some of either your organization or some of the one that you are assisting, um, they really handle the pandemic and the experience aspect really well, that you say, okay, this is probably a good role model. Like what are some of those, if you can walk us through those?
Sure. So, I mean, there are so many examples where every organization had to figure out what they could do in the last 18 months. I think some of the ones that are really successful are the ones that were very transparent about their own humanity, right? Acknowledging their limitations in their ability to serve their customer. When we think about it, restaurants that perhaps weren't open or didn't have the full services that they otherwise normally would have provided. So I think we got a glimpse into more transparent communication, more sort of demonstration of humanity, that these are organizations that are not perfect too, and they all had to figure out what they could do to stay alive and to serve their customers and keep their employees on board. And I think the ones that are really thriving are the ones that have been able to kind of regain their trust, right? When it comes to safety, when it comes to just re-engaging with those organizations. And so, I mean, I point to those organizations that are nimble, that have figured out what it means to, again, I'll say it again, just being human at scale, like using data, using, their kind of hybrid technologies to figure out how to create that human connection.
And from your perspective, what is an organization that is doing a really good job, right? So basically, have you given it thought that on the maturity scale, if an organization or a culture promote this kind of experience building? I think you said it, being human at scale. I think that's a wonderful word. So have you given it a thought that what's a mature, well run experience organization look like?
So there's so many companies and organizations that I admire, who have really kind of put experience at the center of what they do. I think some that I might kind of point out, like I really admire what Delta Airlines had done with their gratitude campaign about a year ago, and it was a campaign, but it was also, you could show up in the airport and they had a gratitude wall where you could write a little note, and put something that you were grateful for, and a person who might have, a traveler who might have come in behind you could get that note. So I think that's just a great example of kind of what it means to kind of build connections even among strangers, right? When we fly, we are very much among strangers, but we are all looking to make a connection. So I think Delta Airlines has done a nice job of that. I admire, organizations that are very founded in in my language, what it means to focus on the human. But so whether it's a Patagonia or a Chobani, that they really are putting some larger sense of purpose at the forefront of what they're doing.
Well put. And on the human experience, innovation that are happening around the ecosystem, like what are some of the innovations that you're really excited about seeing, whatever is happening? Like what are some of the things that um, that you're optimistic, or you're seeing that this is where the human experience aspect of an organization is heading to?
Um, Again, there's so many different things to kind of, just to pick one or two examples. I'll share with you maybe an example in my own organization where, as we've sort of focused on what it means to kind of elevate the human experience, starting with our workforce, we've done something where we've created a human experience dream team. And what we do is we send out a survey, a simple survey that everyone would get about once a month. And we simply ask, what can we do to elevate your human experience? And it's not anonymous, so you can write in and sort of, say I'm having a bad day, or my basement flooded, or I've written in personally and said, what would elevate my experience is, high quality dark chocolate. And and there is an actual team of humans, right, who's looking at all the data, going back to the humanity and the data. And that team sort of sorts through all of these things. Some cases you just route it to, the policy or the website that person might need help with. But we can also, create those surprise and delight moments where there was the time where the team found me where I was traveling to that day and actually got me, the high quality dark chocolate. And so it's not just about that moment, but obviously it made an impact on me, right, in terms of my own experience. But then also what we can do to kind of take a look at all of that data, right, where we can kind of, as leaders of organizations, understand where is the sentiment, where are people struggling, what are the challenges that we need to focus on, and what might we need to change in terms of our leadership and in our policies more broadly. So just an example, again, coming back to the kind of the data and the human experience.
And if I am an organizational leader, so like if I'm leading an organization and I'm obviously gone through this pandemic lockdown, I see that my employees are suffering. They have been alone and all that, and my technology is again high touch. I'm a high touch organization. What would I learn? Like, what would you suggest me? What would you tell me that I should do to at least get on the journey of creating a more human experience centric organization?
I love that you're asking that, because I think about the fact that one of the reasons I do this work is because it's the type of world I want to live in, right? It's the type of organization I personally want to be a part of, one that is asking that exact question, like how can I show up in a way that's more human? So what I'll say is, I think there's 3 paths that we can go on, and I share this, as you know, in my book. But the first path is all about what it means as a leader to grow as an individual. And because if we got to do the work on ourselves first before we can kind of show up and do it for or with anyone else. The second path is what we do as allies, sponsors and mentors to another, and to kind of help them feel like they are worthy on their own human experience. And then finally, and obviously most challenging, is what we can do as leaders to change the system that we participate in. Right? If the system is broken, it's our job to redesign it and fix it so that everybody feels like they can show up with their authentic, worthy selves at work.
I think that's a very interesting put. So one thing as a leader I struggle with is, obviously there's a strong cultural element in it, right? So if I'm culturally something, and now I have to act in a different way because of, I think again, pandemic has. So one thing we ask all the CHROs that we talk to, what is the number one surprise that hit you, that you realize that you're not prepared for? It's that so much of mental health is required in basically in their workforce. They have never seen that the extent to mental health that is required to keep, because they never used to care. There was a lot of talk around performance, there was a lot of talk around productivity, but never about mental health before last year. So when I'm listening to this, right, so I think the similar struggle, and you rightly pointed, you're rightly suggesting that uh, building a culture of self-embracing, then ally, and then creating this community culture. So tactically, what are some of the steps that I can do today, that you can suggest that will help me get on this journey to create a more human centric organization?
So maybe I'll start by sharing a little bit more of my own journey and the research that we did for this book. So we interviewed many people, but we also did a quantitative study of 6,000 people in the U.S. On this whole topic of love and worth in the workplace, and how does it vary, and we geeked out on all the different kind of ways to cut the data. But I'll tell you, the single most interesting finding, Michelle, was that 9 out of 10 of us say that it matters to us to feel worthy, right? Not that surprising. But what surprised me was that about half of us, myself included, struggle to feel worthy. And now that we show up at work, more now than any other time in history, and it's the whole borderless, we're kind of working from home, always on, that this idea of needing to feel worthy, even when in our workplace, we're constantly getting feedback, we're constantly, being told that, maybe we don't measure up, that, to your point about the kind of mental health challenges, that narrative in your head that makes you feel unworthy, so many of us are walking around with. So to your actual question of, well, what can we do about that, right? If that is the case, right, as our research showed, what do we do? And I'll share with you just one personal vignette. I was having a particularly challenging time with this struggle of, I was a mother of three. I was a management consultant. I could tell you that being a mother really wasn't relevant at work, and being at work and anything I might accomplish there was really not relevant at home. And so many of us lead these sort of dichotomized lives where, for me, I was either mama or I was management consultant, and neither both. And I think one of the very practical things that a friend of mine and coach shared with me was that to continue to grow personally and professionally, I would need to learn how to grow in vulnerability. I was like, well, that sounds hard. That sounds scary. I don't want to do that. But what she shared with me was the more I could learn to love myself, and really kind of get more comfortable with that language, the more I'd be able to kind of show up as a leader and love the people that I work with and help them grow. And so I'll tell you, she actually had me do this little exercise to write down the 30 reasons why I'm lovable, which I'll tell you was really hard. It's really challenging, particularly if you're struggling, like I do, to kind of feel worthy of love. But what it did was it helped me to articulate why I'm lovable. And I'll tell you, my list starts with I am lovable because I have a warm smile. And it also reminds me that there are others out there who may also be struggling with what it means to feel lovable, and how, therefore, can I influence their day when I meet them.
I think wonderfully put, and this is true story. So I spoke to one of the career coach, and I asked him that, okay, how can you be a good leader, right? How can I empathize and all that? So he said, Vishal, so he gave me a great exercise. He said, why don't you every day write me one thing that you're horrible about? Okay, so for 1 week, just do it. So as many things you can think of, right? So every day there's like 7, 8. I was like never short of something or the other which I'm horrible about that day, right? So next week, he said, okay, now let's flip the coin. Now your task is to write one thing that you're thankful about. I said, okay. So I went home, I started writing this thing. First day was amazing. I wrote something that I'm random thing that I'm thankful about. Next day was nightmare. Third day was boring. Fourth day was like, where we are not trained to appreciate. I think self-worth. I think that's why when I was reading this book, I think one thing was fascinating, because when you see the stats, you realize you're not alone, right? But you are alone in that journey, right? So when I think before touching the book, it looks like you're one of the odd ones out. But then when you realize, okay, wow, 9 out of 10 see that they are actually me. At some point in my life, I have been one of those guys. Majority of 9 out of 10 times in my life, I've been that guy or gal that this is what's going on. So absolutely, I think relevant point there. So on that note, let's get on this. Let's get on the book. And I think thank you for writing this. Pretty useful. And what got you this idea to write about this book?
So I'll tell you, Vishal, that I wrote this book because I needed it. And I needed it because I am very much a mother of 3 wonderful children, now ages 15, 13, and 11. And I am a management consultant. I'm a partner at my firm, and I felt like I needed a book that brought together both head and heart, and helped me to kind of feel like I could bring my whole self to everything that I do, whether it's at work or it's with my family. And I felt like I wanted it to be well researched and have the data kind of behind it, but also to be personal and to be vulnerable. And I also feel like there's a way in which I wrote this book for my younger self, and younger selves out there, to your point, who at any point may struggle, and that it may be something of a guide for them.
No, I think this is so fascinating, by the way. And I think one thing that when I was reading this, one thing that I was struggling, if that's even a word in this, I think it was well written, but I was trying to figure out how much do you expect me to solve this, or how much you expect my surrounding to provide for this ecosystem, right? So you talked about, okay, that I think there are three ways to achieve
Right.
self-worth. Wonderfully put. Why don't first we walk us through the three ways you're talking about?
Sure. So on the journey, as I said earlier, there's three paths. And the first path is the work we have to do for ourselves. And that was the example I shared around. I had work to do to see myself as worthy, and to literally write it down and to pay attention to the reasons why I'm lovable, because I couldn't see it, right? And so there is work, I think, that many of us, perhaps not all, but many of us have to do just into reframing into how we see ourselves. Then there is the work on the path where we have friends and mentors, and sponsors and benefactors, and this whole network of people who help us feel worthy and loved and supported. And we need to, spend time with that group of people, both for whom we are that to others, and we're on the receiving end. Right? And so there's absolutely those kind of important one-to-one relationships. And then there's that third part, which is, are we in a community at work where we feel like we can thrive, where we feel like we can show up with our whole selves, where our voices are heard, where who we are as a human is respected? And are we in an environment that sort of acknowledges kind of our fundamental human needs?
And I think so. On that note, which one do you see has the path to least resistance? So I think when you go through these three paths, and I was thinking about myself, by the way. So when I was thinking about myself, I said, okay, self-worth is nightmare to achieve. Obviously, if it's a very personality trait. So sure, like some people are very good at that. Some people are horrible at evaluating themselves. Helping others, I think most of us are sort of comfortable around that idea, right? So I
Right.
think what pandemic has told us, we are far better helpers than being helped, in certain ways. Organization, I think that the third aspect was pretty interesting to me, right? So um, as a leader, I thought, okay, maybe the third one is the catchy one. Okay, so that's creating an ecosystem. You can create, surround, you can hire, you can consult, you can put tools and system in place. Second one is, okay, if I have time, I'll lend one. And third is like, and the first path that it covers, that was the most struggling path for me.
Sure. I agree.
When you were that's why I'm curious to learn about your perspective. How do you evaluate these three paths from easy to tough, or like what was coming to you when you, because it's wonderfully written, it's wonderfully put. Is which one do you think that would, or is there any such sequence?
Okay, so what I'll say is all three paths are hard. Full stop. Right. And we're not done. We're never done. Right. Yeah. So I obviously wrote this book. I shared personal stories. I shared stories from other people that I interviewed, but we're not done. So I think, and there's a way in which knowing that they're going to be hard and that we're not ever sort of, totally done can be sort of, it can make it feel like it's less of an obstacle. I do also talk about in the book the fact that there are obstacles in each of these paths, right? There are reasons why our individual feelings of worth are challenged every day at work. There are obstacles in what it means to try and connect with another human being. We miscommunicate, we bring our ego, the technology fails us. Like there's all kinds of reasons why we don't connect with another person. We have our own biases. And then obviously there's obstacles at the organizational and the community level, all of which are hard. And so I don't want to be, imply that it's daunting. I think that the journey is worth it. but each one of them is hard. And I think I did start with the individual for a reason, because, just in listening to you, like, we can't give away anything that we don't have. And if we don't have that strong sense of worthiness for ourselves, we can't give it to another individual or to another organization that we work with. So that's why I think there is that sequence of starting with the individual. But I do think we can move around, right? That's not necessarily where we have to kind of stay.
So on that note, so what are some of the obstacles that each path? I think let's spend 2 minutes on what are some of the obstacles that you found on each path that we should worry about, or that we should expect.
Sure. I mean, so let's starting with the individual. I think there's a lot of obstacles to seeing ourselves as worthy. I think one of them is just misperceptions, right? We don't talk about that I'm lovable. We don't talk about that I'm worthy, because it's just not something that we talk about at work, right? So there's that. I think one of the big ones that I learned about in my research is obviously particularly for men, and the ways in which young boys are told that the language of worth, or the language of their whole sort of emotional lives of boys, that really only kind of anger or withdrawal are acceptable human emotions. I think we've raised whole generations of men to feel like even that their feelings are not validated, and so I think there's an obstacle in terms of maybe a hyper-masculization of culture that we've created. I think that's one that I explore in the book. And then there's obstacles, obviously, in our own heads, right? The narrative that we tell ourselves, the story that we tell ourselves, and we believe just because it's in our own voice. And it may or may not be true, but because the voice is familiar, it must be, we sort of give it, more faith than perhaps what others might tell us. So I do think there's obstacles at every path.
And what about serving others and the community? What are the obstacles there?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest obstacles in demonstrating that kind of love and worth to another is our own need to be loved and our own kind of ego. So one of the things I talk about is the speed to empathy, and the fact that let's say you and I have a communication breakdown, and I'm all upset because you said something, and you're upset because I said something. The sort of common human behavior will be to just kind of wait for the other person to admit that they were wrong and that they need to come and apologize or make the first move or whatever it is. And so we wait, but we're both waiting. And so one of the reasons that communications and kind of connections breaks down is that willingness to kind of speed to empathy of, you know what, you're hurting too, just because like my hurting doesn't matter more than your hurting. Right. And so I think, so I often think about that need to have our own hurts or our own feelings validated can stand in the way of our ability to, care for somebody else.
Interesting. So what do you suggest if someone's self-worth is challenged, right? How should, from your vantage point, how do you expect the person to behave or to act if someone's self-worth is challenged? Like, what did you get a perspective on that?
Meaning, if I'm trying to be an ally or mentor to someone, and that's if
you are the subject and your self-worth is challenged, right? So if
Sure.
Suppose you're hurt or whatever, right? So how do you expect someone to behave?
Well, if someone's, as I have and as I do, sort of struggling with worthiness, I think there is, a series of things that I talk about in my book that that become a practice, right? So again, what you pay attention to grows. So I would say to that individual, it would be important to develop that practice of whether using words of kindness, to yourself, which again, I share, I remember the first time a friend texted me, "Hey, Amelia, be kind to yourself."
Hmm.
That idea blew my fuses.
Hmm.
Of course, we'd be kind to somebody else,
Hmm.
right? Of course, you'd be kind to a family member or a friend. But the idea that you would first learn to be kind to yourself and have a language system of kindness to yourself, that blew my mind, right? And so I think there's things that I would, I talk about in the book around developing those habits and those patterns of what it means to how we talk to ourselves. I share in the book that when I do something that is a mistake, I automatically go to foolish girl,
Hmm.
right? I would never call a colleague a foolish girl or a foolish boy, but I would
Hmm.
call myself a foolish girl.
Hmm.
And so I'm trying to retrain myself and the language I use to talk to myself,
Hmm.
because that helps to kind of grow in worth.
I think that's a very interesting point. So even say when you talk about so there's a lot of cultural or diversity and cultural unrest nowadays, right? So you are seeing a lot about and then when you realize that, say, if you are a diverse group, right? So your perception of self-worth is different from like some other group, or like, so every sort of sect group has a different perspective on the self-worth. So
Sure.
when you look at self-worth from your vantage point, um how do you measure it? Like, so is there any such measure of, is it like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't try to specifically measure worth in terms other than self-reported,
Right,
right?
right,
So,
right, right.
so I didn't, I haven't sort of come up with an indicator that says, here's the scale of kind of worthiness. But in your question, you were definitely onto something with the way in which different communities, some more historically marginalized than others, characteristically feel worthy or not, right? So one that we talked about is women and men,
Hmm.
and that women in the workplace feeling like they don't measure up to the men for whom it's we will never have the kind of the Y chromosome, and so there is that gap that I explore
Hmm.
in the book. There's also I did a lot of um, interviews with colleagues who are not white,
Hmm.
or non-hetero, and they talk a lot about what does it mean to struggle when who you are is not necessarily recognized as worthy. And so a particular colleague of mine who's a gay black man talked about you obviously working twice as hard for as much kind of sort of recognition. And so I think you're absolutely right that one of the reasons that we see this kind of worthiness gap is we don't all start off at the kind of level playing field.
Hmm.
And that gets to that third path where often we are invited to kind of lean into the system, right? Just show up and kind of play the game as others have kind of played it before us. But as I talk about, I don't believe it's our responsibility to lean into a system that's broken. I believe it's our responsibility to deconstruct it and then redesign it, in a way that elevates the human experience.
No, I think you're spot on. So so um, one thing that I like about at least the title of the book, right? So even the title was pretty exciting. So I think whenever you talk about say basically um, worth and experience, I think that itself. So many time. If you are from a minority group, or if you're from a at least a diverse group, right? So you understand that you have a cultural significance on worth. So many culture promote self-worth. Many sort of culture suggest there's a hierarchy, that the worth, there's a hierarchy that stands before the worth, and then obviously you have to understand that. So when you realize that, as a leader, when you read this, when I was reading this book, right? So all I'm thinking about my workers. All I'm thinking
Right.
about is how they feel, how I'm making them feel, how I can help them so they can feel better, right? So at least from the aspect of that is where the experience was pretty handy, right? That tool was pretty handy, that okay, as an organization, you can implement this idea of creating a conducive environment, so that everyone feels welcome, and sort of you can give them enough tools and ecosystem. um, I'm curious, like from when you were writing this book, um, if you are looking at an organization, and how do you envision an organization implementing a well-rounded strategy when it comes to creating a good self-worth creating organization?
I love your questions. They're never easy. It's like as though we would solve all of the problems with in this conversation. I I think there's a few things I think about. I think the place I would start is with that sort of honest reckoning of what the human struggle is. And I think part of it is I explore the topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, which, as you talked about, the topic of burnout, which is huge right now, the search for meaning and kind of purpose in our work. And my perspective is they're all related, right? They're all related to that fundamental human need to feel like we are worthy and that our experience matters.
Mm.
And so, just about every organization will have efforts underway across those three topics, right? They're going to have, the team focused on DE&I, they've got the team focused on purpose, and many will have teams kind of focused on the topic of burnout. And I think that's great, right? And I think we absolutely need that. But in terms of what I think I'd like the future that we're kind of making together to look like, I do think we need to start having a conversation about this fundamental human experience, and what does it mean to see people as worthy, and how can we kind of create those environments where people can feel like they can show up with their authentic selves, and acknowledging that there are people for whom they're going to expend a lot of energy just asking themselves, should I say anything in this meeting? Like, does my opinion matter? Am I going to get talked over? What do the other people think? Are they all thinking about me? Like, there's a lot of wasted potential that I think as leaders we can kind of harness in our organizations.
And what is the role of a technologist through this? So I use this line a lot, that the world would be amazing when analysts dream and dreamers analyze, right? So when they both come together. So when you look at this this I think if you look at all the technology that we have our hands on, many of them have been privy to all the problem that we are facing as a society, right? So whether it's loneliness, alone, I think those things. So when you look at those, and this idea of creating a human centric, humanizing experience organization, what do you think is the role of a technologist through this?
So I'd say a couple things. First, I would say that that the data can help us see the patterns, right? And so we absolutely use data to help us understand where might we have experiences that are in need of elevating, right? So that's the first thing. So that the data can absolutely be a source there. I think of technologists as pivotal in that they are problem solvers, right? And they're figuring out how to take, classically, that I think of the definition of innovation is to remove friction, to make it easier to do hard things, and technology lets us do that. And so I think my hope is that technologists out there would be absolutely thinking about the technology that they're building towards a human end, and that we wouldn't just be putting out more technology for its own sake, but that it would be towards the end of actually making the humans at the other end of it feel like their lives are a bit better.
And what is the role of a leader through this?
Oh my goodness. As though that's a simple question. So I guess I would start by saying, personally, my philosophy of leadership is that we can help people become and grow to become their best selves when we believe in them and love them, right? So, obviously I can unpack each of those words, but that's what leaders do. They believe in you, and they love you enough to kind of invest, their time and their care to help you grow. I think leaders we can all grow in that sort of equal parts head and heart. Often we get promoted to leadership roles because we're very good technically at our skill, but I know I had to grow in what it means to balance that kind of head and heart. And then I think the third thing, as leaders, we can humanize ourselves. So I think I've been thinking a lot about this topic of humanizing leadership, because there are misperceptions that if someone is in a role, right, you and I and our listeners in a role as leader, that somehow we've got things figured out. But with vulnerability, we can humanize what it means to be a leader.
I think that's well put, and even I think I really admire you for writing your story, your journey.
Thank
Because
you.
I think that many times that is the hardest thing to do, is to just make yourself vulnerable enough, and I think that's inviting. That makes you actually, people like you more, because now they can relate with you. They can see that. I think and thank you for doing that. So I think you talked about that self-worth and burnouts are related. So talk to us about that.
So, I mean, I feel like I can talk about burnout either sort of theoretically or personally, right? And I think burnout, for me, is when we've made other people's priorities and other people's important things more important than our own mental health or our own sort of experience. And we do that for good reasons, right? We want to, take that time to be with a friend. We want to spend that extra time with a colleague. We want to give, 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 give. But going back to what I said earlier about talking to ourselves in a way that's, like we would a friend, we also need to treat ourselves like we would a friend, so that we don't give away the things that we don't have. And I think, particularly now that we are available 24 hours on Zoom, and you can kind of drop in on anyone around the world, I think being more clear about the boundaries that we have, and kind of maintaining those so that we do have space for ourselves. It can sound selfish, but I do think kind of replenishing and nourishing ourselves is really important so that we can be our best for others.
Interesting. And what do you expect the reader to take away from the book?
I would say this, that I think about the fact that innovators and artists oftentimes feel like they don't belong in an organization because they see the world differently, and they see the world as it could be, not necessarily as it is. My hope is that a leader would take away from this book that they have the opportunity to shape the world as it could be, not as it is. And that we all, as leaders, have the opportunity to shape the experiences for ourselves, for another individual, and then for the communities that we show up with. And so I guess my hope is that people who would be interested in this book would go out there and really start to challenge some of the orthodoxies around the way work has to be. And I would love it if work was a place where we felt like we could be more authentic with each other.
So another interesting observation that I had while reading the book is who would enjoy this book best, right? So as I said, at one point I was that guy who needs to improve the self worth, which I'm horrible at, and then at one point I was trying to be the leader in which I can help my company or my workers
Right.
feel more
We've all
respected
done that, right?
right. So when you were writing that book, I'm curious, like what would you have in mind when it comes to the ideal reader of the book?
So as I said, I wrote this book for people who have struggled to feel worthy of love, and for the people who love and lead the people who struggle, right? Because to your point, you may or may not be struggling right now to feeling kind of worthy and not like you can be your authentic self, but no doubt you love somebody or you lead someone who does. And just being mindful that if you don't struggle, that you have around you people who may. These are the people I'd like to find this book.
Awesome. I think with that, thank you so much for walking us through the book. Now we'll end at the tail end of the conversation. We call it to another segment. It's called rapid fire.
Okay.
So how will that work? I'll say a word, and then you say whatever comes to your mind. It could be a word or a one-liner, whichever.
Sure.
Take your creative liberty there. So should we start that?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Awesome. Purpose,
The need for meaning.
entrepreneurship,
Like discovering the new.
failures,
We need to learn from them.
growth,
I'd say growth mindset for me.
culture.
What is it? What's the expression? The culture eats strategy for lunch?
Yeah. It depends. Someone throw it on the breakfast, someone throw it on the lunch. But yes,
Okay, fair enough.
culture does
Either
eat.
breakfast or lunch.
Human experience,
I mean, it's a hard because for me it signifies so many things. But I would say the need to elevate it, make it better,
disruption,
change.
jobs of future,
I would say jobs of today. Right. We talk about the future of work, but it's the future of it's today.
uh, future of organizations.
I guess I'll say that I want the future of organizations to be more human.
Interesting. Burnout.
The need for self-care.
Thank you for playing that. I think it's fascinating. So now at the tail end of the conversation, and we want to spend few minutes on your journey, on your personal journey being a leader. So we ask all of our guests to talk about some of the traits, some of the qualities that has helped shape them what they are today. Like, what are some of the qualities you attribute success to?
Oh my goodness. The qualities I attribute sort of success generally or success for me personally.
Personally, yeah.
Okay, I think I would talk about curiosity. And I think it's related to what I indicated earlier around growth mindset, that the great leaders are the ones who are never so convinced that they already know what's going on that they aren't curious to learn more. And so I think for me, I know early on, people mentors and bosses gave me feedback would always say that I asked really interesting questions. And I know that when I'm conducting interviews, I'm always fascinated by the people who do have really interesting questions. And so I think one of the keys to success is always be curious. Always, particularly as an innovator, always ask the question that someone else isn't asking.
Slightly tangent on that response. Do you think you can teach someone curiosity? Just your perspective. So it's a vague, random.
I think I would go back and say what you pay attention to grows. So I think you can teach someone to grow that muscle, just like you can grow the muscle of empathy. You can grow your curiosity. I think what happens is we lose our curiosity because someone tells a stupid question, or why are you asking that, or your voice doesn't matter. So I do think people shut down their curiosity, and they need space and permission to feel like they can embrace their own curiosity.
I think because I have this in the data science world. I have this debate constantly whenever I'm talking to any, say, either chief data officer or any leader. How, as you rightly pointing it out, your muscle gets tightened up if you have. Sometimes you say that that you have data, you have everything that you need to decide on, and you never challenge that. You're not curious to scratch and never curious to validate or say maybe the condition changed, maybe that I should take a peek on the side if something going on. So
Right.
it was fascinating. I remember I was talking to this founder of Under Armour, and he's telling me, Vishal, the product managers keep throwing me data, right? about how wonderful these clothes and these shoes are. But many times I love going out to kid parks and then see kid interact with the shoe, because that is what the thing that I gain from that would never be communicated in data, right? So because
Yeah,
I was always informed that I have enough data to decide, but many time you realize that no, it's function, it's data saying it's good, focus group says it's amazing, but I see kids not liking this when they're actually playing in the field. So that's going
right.
on. So I think it's rightly put, and thank you for walking us through
Well,
that.
well, I think, I mean, what the story you shared illustrates is that the innovators and great leaders ask why 5 times, where, where you and I might stop, after once or twice. That the people who continue to ask why are the ones that kind of get to the heart of issues, and can help see the world differently and solve problems for us.
Wonderfully put, and thank you for walking us through that. So, besides elevating the human experience book, what other books if we ask all of our guests to share some of their favorite reads, some of the
Mhm.
books that they, do you have any other favorite read to share with our listeners and viewers?
Sure. So a lot of the books that I was inspired by as I wrote my own book. So Brene Brown, Daring Greatly, and one of the things I admire about her is bringing social science and
Hmm.
and vulnerability in her own personal story, to her work, and just to make it widely accessible. So I definitely admire her work. Um, Also in the academic field, bell hooks, and some of the research that she's also done. And as you can probably tell, there's a theme here for me, that sort of equal parts
Hmm.
research, kind
Hmm.
of geek
Hmm.
out, but also vulnerability in a way that we can all connect with. So I'd say there are two that I admire.
I think what I really so if you would say the enhancement on the book. So I if I would sort of do this book, maybe 2.0
Hmm.
version of that, right? So it is full with stats, amazing sort of anecdotes. I think that's good. Having sort of a counter psychiatrist giving their side of the story, because I think it's a very good timely book on that. I think it's a fascinating read. So I definitely was missing this idea of, okay, what if um, someone says this anecdotal story from, say, cultural, from historian talking about, because these are very good, like we should, as a society, we should talk about these things, right? So these are very thought provoking. As a leader, I feel the need to know these things, right? And
Hmm.
I think your stats justifies that we all need to know that, and I think that's why um, kudos to you for as you rightly said, that part heart and part brain, that we need to push this is fascinating.
Thank you. I mean, I do think one of my hopes for the book is that it would enter into the dialogue and
Hmm.
enter into the debate, right? So as you were just describing, that there will be other people's lived experiences, there will be other organizations, particular dynamics, and to what extent does what I have to share, enter into that conversation, right? I don't think it can't be the entirety of it, right? But to what extent is it part of this dialogue that I think we're all having about what does it mean to show up at work?
Because I think this could lead to a great field manual, right? For actually building a more, because if it these are like I think from the coverage point of view, it's actually what we all as a leader, or what we as a worker experience. Am I being loved? Am I loving anyone? And am I being in the culture where it appreciates me being in it, right? So
Right.
that's the from the aspect of the hallmark of why I should exist. These are all great thoughts, right? Of and you rightly pointed out, these are very very hard thought to. So having sort of these field guides of, okay, this is your parachute there, this is your parachute there, this is your parachute there, would turn enormous for either a worker or a leader or a practitioner to sort of take this and create this. So I think that's definitely a great conversation starter, for sure.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome. So last but not the least, if you want if you want something that our listeners and viewers to take away from this conversation, from this book, what would that be? Like, what would be your closing thought?
I guess I would close with just this idea that I've been thinking about a lot, which is our work will have meaning when, as humans, we have worth. And then to unpack that, there's so much dialogue around finding the meaning in work, and kind of beyond just the kind of the value of kind of what we're paid for, but to really get to the point where, as individuals, we feel like we can talk to ourselves in ways that makes us feel worthy. We can learn to talk to each other in ways that makes each other feel worthy, and then create organizations where we can all do our best work, because we're not worried about whether or not we are kind of respected and seen as worthy when we show up at work.
With that, Amelia, thank you so much for this amazing work. Thank you so much for educating us the importance of the self-worth in an organization and how it's important for creating a more humanistic organization. We all need to know this, and thank you for shedding light on this. And thank you for being gracious on your time and helping us understand this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And you're always welcome back on the podcast. And if our listeners and viewers want to order this book, they can, I think that there'll be a link on the description. Where can they get hold of you if they want to connect with you, or
AmeliaDunlop.com. That's where to find me.
Where, sorry?
My website is AmeliaDunlop.com.
AmeliaDunlop.com. I'll put that link on the description as well to our listeners and viewers. With that, thank you so much, Amelia, for spending time with us. Thank you for again. Wish you nothing but success on the book. Thank you.
Pleasure.